Thanks for coming. Thanks, Cheryl, and the balance team. It's been a lot of fun working with you guys over the past couple of years. So let's talk about risk for payments. I'm going to be clicking here every once in a while to move this along. So first, who am I? My name is Ohad. I've been in machine learning for financial services for a bit more than 8 years now, almost 8.5. I started working as a head of risk analytics for a company called Fraud Sciences. We did high-risk payments globally, where we provided an insurance. We approved the purchase, and you got a chargeback. We would pay you the money in full. Did all kinds of interesting stuff, and from World of Warcraft gold in Singapore to pre-owned Rolexes bought by Arab sheiks in the Philippines in the middle of the night. True story. It was interesting. So in 2008, we got acquired by PayPal. Spent 2.5 years in PayPal, integrating the acquired team. Then moved here, ran new ventures risk for PayPal, digital goods, mobile payments, stuff like that. Left in 2010. Started working on a couple projects. One of them is called Signify, the company doing risk management, fraud prevention, still around. The other was called Analyze, the predictive analytics shop, generally for payments and other areas. In 2011, we got picked up by Klarna, a European payments company providing short-term in-checkout credit to consumers. Basically, get the product now, pay later. I was their chief risk officer for about 2 years, and now working on a company called True Accord, trying to reinvent that collections as a more reasonable, friendlier practice, or as someone here said brilliantly, guilt trip as a service. So that's me. Why are you here? Hopefully you're here because you're dealing with risk management, fraud prevention, credit granting, or an aspect of that work, either directly, or you need to start a team, or you're part of a team, or you are the executive in charge of hiring someone to start a team. I'm being asked a lot of questions about that, how to approach that, who to hire, what to think about, and the catalyst for this talk and a couple of other talks that I'm going to give is a free ebook that I'm going to mention a couple more times that got published by O'Reilly a couple weeks ago that I recommend that you download and read. It's about 70 pages, pretty technical, but gives you a good overview of a lot of topics. So I wanted to talk about the topics that are in the book, that are relevant for the questions that I've been asked and that pushed me to write the book. But obviously I want to talk about them from kind of a little bit of a different perspective. And that perspective is the direction I want to go at is I want to talk a little bit about what is risk. When we talk about risk management for payment, the thing that a lot of you guys do, what is it? So we won't get into a big theoretical discussion. There are many ways to say what a risk function does, but I want to highlight a specific aspect of risk management, of this function and of this responsibility. It's a funny profession, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you're a chief risk officer, or the person in charge of risk in a company, and the company is growing, why are you declining all of this business? Approve more, open up. If something happens, the smallest default, the smallest fraud trade, people are running in the hallways like chickens with their heads cut, shouting, what's happening? You gotta take over, close it down. So, if you were to, I see people nodding. I mean, if you're in the business, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're in charge of a specific aspect that always has to be on its toes, always moves between two extremes. And on a day-to-day basis, we have this question, users, do we suspect them or we help them? As people who deal with risk, sometimes it's counterproductive to growth, right? Somebody comes in, you look at the 5% who are trying to actually rip your company off.
And your job is to turn them into the, I don't know what, whatever your company is comfortable with. It could be 5% if you're a gaming company, or 0.5%, or 10 basis points that fit into the business model. And then what happens with the other 95%? Do we suspect all of them? So if somebody calls and says, hey, I didn't do this purchase, I don't recognize it, and I want you to refund me, but we know that it's probably their kid on their phone that did it, or that used their details, what do we do? Do we say sorry? Do we automatically refund them? Do we say, no problem, we take you very seriously, we want to sue the person who did this to you. All you need to do is file a complaint, and we will go after this person. Calls with this script ended with 50% decline in complaints, because people obviously don't want their kids to be sued. So that raises an interesting question. So, I mean, to me, what I want to highlight here is that risk management is about finding balance. Okay, especially the more it becomes a substantive function in the body of the company, right? If your company doesn't really care about risk, and all you have to do is figure out something to stop a few chargebacks, you may not care about this. But if a lot of your growth is about not rejecting business, it's about if it's about getting the right people in, if it's a big part of your business model, then it's a lot about finding balance. And what I want to focus on today, that different perspective, is I want to focus on a few points or a few cases in which we don't find a balance, or we're too extreme to one end or the other. So I call this talk top 8 reasons you have a fraud problem. I'm going to talk about a few of the top reasons. As far as questions go, please interrupt with questions. I'm going to have to repeat them so we can have a good recording, but please interrupt. I may ask you to wait with a certain question till the end because the answer is going to be long. Or if it's a clarification question, please ask it, and I'll answer. So the top 8 reasons you have a fraud problem. Reason number 1, you don't think you have a problem. So we started Fraud Sciences. Fraud Sciences, like a lot of risk management companies, understood that very early on, it's not about stopping the bad guys, it's about allowing you to accept more good guys. It's about growing your business. So, we started calling. I remember my first cold calls. People would vehemently deny that they have a problem. We don't have a risk problem. We're under 1% in chargebacks. That was 2005, right? So we're talking about really limited thinking. We're good. We're not rejecting business. It's all good. Now, when you start looking at their business, now when eventually some of these merchants started accepting purchases through Fraud Sciences, some of them tripled and quadrupled their business because they were rejecting. They were rejecting purchases from Eastern Europe. They were rejecting purchases from all of Asia. They were rejecting purchases from most of Africa. Not really for a good reason, but basically, they got hit once, they closed the country down, done. So not measuring, or not really defining your problems, not really going after and really understanding whether the current situation is a good situation or one that you need to work out because you're limiting your business, is one aspect. The other aspect is a lot of risk functions focus on measuring end results. How many chargebacks did we get today? How many defaults do we have? A lot of times, one doesn't portray the full picture because a lot of people, sometimes people who are victims of fraud, who are not happy with the service and might have otherwise resulted in a chargeback, don't charge back. But more importantly, if you don't track the way your losses behave, if you don't track the way they evolve over time, you may be surprised. Let me explain that. When you accept a credit card transaction, you don't find out immediately if it's a bad transaction or not. So we're talking about 95% of chargebacks come in within 60 to 70 days after the. If you look at a cohort, I accepted these many transactions in January. By February, what's my loss rate going to be? If you only treat your loss rate as the chargebacks you got so far, and you never look back and you see how your losses have evolved in the past, you will be surprised every time by shifts in your portfolio, by having suddenly accepted a big ring of fraudsters, or maybe accepted a big number of good customers, and not being able to adjust to that. And not being able to adjust to the continuing shifts in the business is the number one reason why we fall off one of the extremes in trying to find a balance and have a fraud problem. So that's one thing. Second reason, you have too many problems. When you deal with an issue in risk management, or it's a general thing for a lot of practices, if you don't have a terminology, if you don't have a mindset, if you don't have a strategy that you fit the way you think about the problems that you discover, too, you end up treating every case as an individual case, and you end up spreading yourself too thinly. Right? Whenever we see a default event, whenever we get a charge, the first question is, what happened? Why did we get this? Right? What is what we call the root cause? Right? What is the root cause for this loss? And when you don't do this investigation, when you don't try to understand what caused this, usually I like to divide this into four. Right? Is this an identity problem? Was this a stolen identity, or did someone hack into an account if you have an account-based system? Is this an ability problem? Somebody who wanted to pay but couldn't? Not really relevant when you have a credit card, but really relevant when you have other modes of payment. Is this an intent issue? Someone who can probably afford to pay, and most probably is using their own details, but thinks that playing on the web and not paying on the web is perfectly fine. That happens a lot in gaming, but not only in gaming. It all boils down to human psychology, right? If there's a cookie jar, an open cookie jar in a room and nobody's looking, will you take a cookie? A lot of people do. It's not a judgment of human nature, it's just a fact, right? So, and when people feel like they're not communicating with a person, a lot of people cheat, just their intent changes, they behave differently. And lastly, number four, operational issues. People make mistakes. One of the problems, one of the markets that I had as Chief Risk Officer for Klarna was having severe risk issues or severe default issues. We were seeing spikes in default. We didn't really know what was the problem. We didn't know if it was fraud, if people were not paying, what was going on. And then, after having researched the matter a little bit more, we discovered that we were sending reminders via email to pay. Klarna extends credit. We were sending reminders, and one of the email providers in this country blacklisted our IP. Is this, is this an identity issue, or an ability issue, an intent issue? Neither, right? It's an operational issue, but this is the kind of things you have to deal with when you want to understand what your problems are and to put them into perspective. So not every small event has to be treated. Not every small event has to be has to have the models adapted to it. What you need to do is you need to understand what happened. You need to have a best guess as to what happened, what caused the loss event, and then you have to think whether you're going to fix it or not, and where does it fit into your methodology. Reason number three, that you have a fraud problem, you think of risk strictly as an ops problem. Again, we're about balance. Right, so a lot of companies grow their risk team from their customer service team. Not necessarily a bad idea if done correctly, but if just left to its own accord, usually a bad idea. Here's the dynamic, and I can tell you it happens all the time. You start accepting payments, chargebacks start to come in. Refunds, people complain. Obviously, the people most equipped to deal with that, customer care. And so over time, the people that you trust in customer care have to deal with more and more chargebacks. So now, at a certain point, you say, oh, this very experienced person from customer care is an expert in our chargebacks. We'll make them the risk team manager, and they'll hire a few people to manage more chargebacks. And then eventually they become the experts for chargebacks in your company. And then at some point, and that for a lot of companies, that happens when they hit the $200, $300 million mark in payment volume. You have 3 to 5 people reviewing all your purchases. They're working like crazy all day, looking at purchases, some stuff they catch, some stuff they don't catch. They're like, dude, I can't do this anymore. You go and you hire a statistician. Statistician doesn't really understand risk management because they've never looked at chargebacks, or they never worked in customer care. They come in, they want to develop a model, they go to the customer care people who know effectively your risk team, and they say, okay, so how do you know that this purchase is bad? How do you know that we should reject it? The guy says, I just know. And what happened here, it's not that these people are not smart, they're not equipped, they're just, their skill set is not geared towards automating decision and automating processes. Their skill set is dealing with people and walking people through a process. Very needed, not the only skill needed. So if you only think about your problem as an ops problem, you're bound to be very one-dimensional in how you treat it. Risk is not strictly an engineering problem. Someone told me that today. We found out that we can't just put in a few sophisticated algorithms and solve the problem. I know. So, why is that, right? We're dealing with an adversary. We are dealing with people whose incentive, whose economic incentive, and sometimes their personal egos, they're geared towards tricking our system. There is no development process, there's no model development process, there's no software development process that can respond to real-time changes in user behavior on an individual level if that individual is set to do something bad to your system. There always needs to be a gap that is bridged by people who deal with events as they evolve. Events that fall outside of the spectrum of what your systems can detect and comprehend. It's only the combination, the right combination of people who write software and people who can do operations and people who understand how to connect the two that builds a strong risk management organization. So going to either extreme is going to create a problem for you. Next point. You think of risk as a big data problem. I gave a talk, it's called Forget Big Data. Unfortunately, there's no transcript. I might give it again one day and then record it, hopefully. Risk is not a big data problem. I'll give you an example that I personally like. When Fraud Sciences, the first company I was a part of, was acquired by PayPal, we were acquired because our models were up to 17% better than PayPal's models. Not all of their models, not all the time. Some of the models, some of the time, up to 17%. Now, PayPal at the time had 3 million transactions daily, 7 million events daily. Fraud Sciences had 60,000 transactions lifetime. Risk is not a big data problem. It is not a big data problem in the sense that the practice of big data deals with the structure of data and counts on the fact that the big training set will represent so many end cases that the algorithm will be able to learn all of these end cases by the structure of the data. This thing doesn't happen in risk. First, our data is limited. If you're PayPal, be my guest, do whatever big data structure, use whatever big data techniques you need. Excuse me. And obviously, that brings lift and is good for PayPal. If you are any other company, the size of the companies that are here today, you are most probably not in any way near the scale that you need for big data. If it goes on a flash drive, it's not big data. But that's one point. But let's talk about points that are a little bit more specific to risk management. First, signal to noise ratio. To detect fraudulent behaviors, you need signal. You need fraudsters. Now, to operate the business, you need low signal ratio, because otherwise you have too many chargebacks. So if you're good at your job, you don't have enough examples to be good at your job. Right? So just treating this as a modeling problem where you need to get as many bad examples as possible is just not going to cut it. And now, what complicates it even more is that most times the performance flag, the indicator that says whether something bad has happened or not, is dirty. It is very hard to say this person hasn't paid because of this. That goes back to point number 2 about terminology and about differentiating why something has or hasn't happened. I can tell you that the main reason why fraud sciences was better than PayPal in specific areas was because we focused on one thing and one thing only. Is this person who they say they are? This user is coming to my website, giving me details of another person, potentially, their credit card, their name, their address, and telling me, I'm this guy, let me buy. Is this person, is this entity sitting on a computer somewhere, and the entity that exists in the world, the person with a credit card, really the same person? You can't just create a paid after 90 days flag, or didn't get chargeback in 90 days flag. It doesn't work like that. That complexifies the signal to noise ratio problem, and it complexifies the actual definition of what the performance of the flag is, to understand that really something bad happened, and this is something that we need to prevent in the future. Reason number 6, the other extreme. You don't think of risk as a data problem. What do I mean by that? I see in companies that I visit, that I work with, I see different types of risk teams. But a most common one, which is changing a little bit now, which is great, but a very common one is the risk team is a team of analytics folks. And they work on using analytics tools, or what was used to be called analytics tools, meaning Excel and similar tools, and business objects, or whatever Cognos, or whatever system, BI system there is. And they work on a highly processed version of the data. The process has been ETL'd, gone through multiple phases, and not only lost its original form and a lot of what was stored in it, that disconnect between the people on one end that are really MBA trained analytics people and the engineers that write the system, is that a lot of stuff is lost along the way. A lot of stuff that engineers don't think is necessary because it's not necessary for their job is being deleted. My favorite example, rejections. I once worked for a company, did a project for a company that never thought that rejections are something that you need to save. Right, so somebody gets rejected, they're like, okay, no money, right? Discard. But rejections tell you a lot, because especially fraudsters get rejected multiple times. They try with different cadences, they try different times, they try with different details. So rejections will tell you a lot. Rejections will tell you a lot about what's happening, what's going on with your legitimate users too. So, specifically then, was a really bad decision. But that's one of the decisions. Another decision, instead of creating an event-based system that can give you a point-in-time analysis of what happened with the transaction at a specific time, or with an account at a specific time, the production system just overrides states. You can only know what's going on with the account right now. Now, that obviously creates a problem if you want to do analysis and want to understand what happened. and do and look back. So you have to think about risk as a data problem. You have to instrument, and you have to save data so that you can then analyze it. Reason number 7, you don't use the right tools. To be fair, this point, most companies use the right tools. When I talk about right tools, I mean the following. You need to have a user interface for your users, for your team, to be able to look at purchases or to look at events and understand what happened in them. If you have 3-4 systems that they have to collect information from, seen this, or this happens a lot when you start from a customer care team and then you expand into a risk team, that there's a lot of context shift, they'll forget stuff, they won't be able to connect the dots the way they need to connect the dots. It sounds mundane, it's not. It's something you need to worry about, especially if you have a big fraud problem. Second point, you need to have a good rule system. And I'm not being specific because there aren't a lot of good off-the-shelf risk systems. Rules is nice, but you have to customize it a lot. A lot of companies end up building stuff in-house, specifically for risk. There aren't a lot of good enterprise tools. But you need to have the ability to impact stuff that are happening, and like I said, let operations bridge the gap between what your models understand now and what they'll understand in 6 months. You have to deal with linking and velocity. You need to be able to say, oh, this user who's just on our website is the same user as the one who's been on our website a week ago. All of these things, if you sit here and you say, of course, it's obvious, great, good for you. It doesn't happen that often that companies have all of these suite of tools operating in a good way and working for its risk team. And last, you need to be able to quickly train and deploy models. When you reach a certain scale, being able to quickly deploy models, new models, train them and deploy them, is so significant because if, in most cases, models decay so quickly, model performance decays so quickly, that I would trade off, and that is for people who train models, I would trade off overfitting for quick deployment time. I would accept that my model is making mistakes and only looking at a specific set of problems, as long as I can very quickly, when that landscape changes, retrain another model and deploy it. That's the basic idea. And I won't go into details about that, but this point is really, really important. And something to consider, especially when you start really deploying models and doing decision automation. Last point, you use your tools incorrectly. And when I say using tools incorrectly, I mean mostly responding to events in an extreme way. A lot of times, the dynamic works, and it's exactly what I said when I started the conversation, then if you do, then if you don't. A lot of times something bad happens without understanding it. The inclination is to say, okay, let's block it. Oh, we got a chargeback for $2,000 from Norway. Let's block Norway over $2,000. Very common, right? Oh, we got a chargeback from this IP range. Let's block all the C class. That happens a lot. Now, if you suddenly get 50 transactions from 2 IPs from the same C class, is this an attack? Or one of your merchants having a promotion in the university and all the students going to the lab to buy on their website? I don't know. You don't know either until you check. And that's exactly my point. Again, going back to methodology, again, going back to putting everything into perspective, you need to be able to respond to problems in a way that reflects your strategy and doesn't hurt your business just to satisfy this immediate
thing that's burning, this immediate emergency. That's number 8. And the bonus one, didn't get the book. But seriously, it's free. Get it, read it. It won't take so much of your time, and it's going to, I hope, put what I said here into perspective and expand on some of the things that I think are really important to expand on, specifically on methodology. I really did not get into it because there's no way it's going to be easy to comprehend just by me talking. It's important to read it. That's it. That was good. Thank you.